All right. I hope you all had a great break. I enjoyed mine. It was much needed for me. Just a few things I wanted to point out before we start our next session. You can join the Georgia Research Administrators Network on LinkedIn. If you're unable to find it on LinkedIn, you can certainly send your contact information to Gail Spat in the chat, and she can add you to the group. Also, evaluations for all the presentations will be sent out after the conference. It's one evaluation for the entire conference, but you will be able to evaluate each session individually that you were able to attend. And also a copy of the presentations and handouts, if there were any, will be sent to all the registered participants as well. So if by any chance you're on here and we're not able to register, send us an email at grants@columbusState.edu, and we can also make sure that you're added to the list to make sure that you get the presentation and the handouts. If you were on the within the group already, I just sent this next session slides and handouts. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bruxanne and Lindsey. Bruxanne's with Georgia Southern, right, Bruxanne? Okay, and Lindsey's with Georgia State. So glad to have you guys here today. I'm going to tap out.
Thank you, Erica, and thanks everyone for coming today. We want to talk a little bit about the 5-day rule or alternative proposal submission deadlines. My name is Bruxanne Hein. I'm from Georgia Southern University. I am today in sunny Savannah, Georgia, where it's supposed to be 85 degrees, yay, and fully pollinated. And my co-presenter, Lindsey, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lindsey Hornsby. I'm with Georgia State University. I'm the College Research Officer for the College of Arts and Sciences. I've been with Georgia State for a little over 10 years.
Great. Lindsey, do you want to introduce our, sorry, the slide won't move. Technical difficulties. There we go. Do you want to introduce our agenda?
Sure. So today we're going to do kind of an overview of proposal internal submission deadlines, and we're going to talk about timelines that different universities use for proposal submissions for faculty members, including the one that we see a lot, which is a 5-day rule, but you will also see some that are less and some that are much more than that. We're also going to talk about why we use these type of rules for reviews and why reviews are so vital to successful proposal submissions and getting them in the right manner. We're also going to talk about some alternatives to these rules or some ways to make these processes less painful for PIs, faculty, and research administrators. We're going to have a couple of polls and some questions, and we'll end with the discussion and take any questions that anybody has.
We'll get started. So we do have a poll with this slide, but we wanted to talk about the 5-day rule for proposal submissions. What is it when we're talking about a 5-day rule? As we know, most institutions, actually I haven't seen an institution that does not have a policy on proposal submissions, which typically includes deadlines for internal review and approvals. Most commonly used is a 5-day rule. We know institutions have to review and approve proposals that commit the institution to provide time or materials, cost sharing, matching, funding, equipment, faculty time, student time, all of these to an external sponsored program. The 5-day rule typically provides faculty 5 business days from the external deadline to the sponsor to submit their proposals for those internal reviews and approvals. Some of the parameters among the institutions vary. Some require a full proposal to be submitted within 5 days, or allow the budget and justification and supporting docs to be submitted at 5 days with the technical docs at 3. I've seen 10 days for initial documentation, 5 days for the full complete proposal, 7 days for a full proposal with 3 days for technical docs. So there's a number of variations among those excuse me, of those activities. Typically, a scope of work, a budget, and justification is the minimum requirement. Did we get our poll up? Yeah. So we want to know, does your institution require a minimum review period? And the no's are surprising.
No, that's a pretty big percentage.
But so, oh, well, more than 100%.
Yeah.
So good. So we have about, we're letting it, the poll run out for another few seconds, but about half use the 5-day rule. 3-day rule is about 14%, requiring more than 5 days, 11%, not having a minimum review period is 17%, and other is 9%. Great, thank you. All right, so when we talk about using policies and enforcing those policies, we call it at our institution policies without teeth. We have a policy set out that typically we don't follow because we do allow faculty to submit proposals within the 5-day range. We do, just like every other institution, we do our best to submit those proposals no matter when they come in. It's not fair. We have to prioritize for those who have turned theirs in on time. But some of the enforcement tactics are what we wanted to talk about with this slide. Lindsey?
Yeah, and we are kind of in the same boat at Georgia State as well, with kind of having this policy and timelines that we try our best to adhere to and try our best to get our faculty to adhere to, but it doesn't always work out like it does at some institutions. One of the harsher consequences that might be out there for late proposal submissions is IDC consequences, or indirect cost consequences on proposals and awards when they come in, which means that either the university or the research office, possibly the college, of the PI will keep a larger percentage of the indirect costs than maybe what is in their written policy, or will keep all of it in some cases. I think this is pretty rare. You're not going to see these type of really harsh consequences very much because they are pretty hard to enforce. And when they are enforced, they have to be like a written policy with a university that has to go through all of that process. And they require people. I mean, usually with a consequence like this, you're going to see the president of the university involved, the provost, the vice president of research. So very high level people in the university to put these types of really harsh consequences in place. And I think you're going to see this mostly when you do see it at really large, high dollar research intensive universities who can kind of afford to put these harsher consequences in place and really put their foot down with faculty members.
Another policy enforcement could be justification, where faculty are asked to provide a justification letter to explain why their submission is late. In most cases, or in some cases, it puts an added burden on the research administrator who has to route the proposal. Research administration staff, explain that the justification doesn't make an impact on the PI. As much as it does on the research administrators who have to then track down yet another document and have it approved, signed off, and then submit the proposal. Depending on who must approve the justification, it might not work as a consequence for PIs or discourage late submissions. Another tactic is pre-approval by a provost or a vice president or a leader in the research office before the submission can happen. That can be a deterrent. Again, it's providing a justification, but then they have to provide a justification to someone in a position of leadership. One of the things that we get if we have repeat offenders, we do inform our VPR of when we have significant late submissions, particularly if they're from one person. Our institution sends a message to the chair or the research dean that the PI was late in submitting. We do note in the file if the submission was late and therefore we couldn't review it. We have a stamp that says submitted without review. But these don't really deter any of the late submitters, especially the frequent flyers, because they do it frequently. They know we'll do it and they know we can do it. So our second poll was, does your institution enforce your proposal submission policy? It's a pretty easy one, is a yes or no. And I don't see it. So we'll move on. So why are proposals submitted at the last minute?
Oh, here we
sorry.
go.
Here we go.
Oh, well, that's the other poll, but that's
the
okay.
last poll.
Yeah, we can go ahead and look at this poll too while people are here.
So one of the things we want to know is where your position is located, because that does affect, I guess, how the submission policy affects you. Being in a department or a center, a college research office, you're more frontline with the faculty than a central research office, unless you're a central research office that is the only line to the faculty, such as ours. So with that poll in place, I'll go ahead and start the next, or Lindsey, you can go ahead and start the next slide.
Okay. So the next thing we kind of want to talk about is the reasons you might get from faculty members for late submissions. One is, they're not aware of the policy. They don't know what the policy is. They've never heard of it. They don't know that they have to route it internally for approvals. They don't know that they have to work with a staff member to get it approved and to that central research office for submission. I think that's one of the more common ones that people will hear, is that they're just not aware that that's required or needed. You're also going to see, it's just a last minute addition to maybe another proposal or something that's already in progress. I'm just trying to add something. And so, I'm running behind and I'm just trying to get, it done as quickly as possible. And then you're going to see some too, maybe an RFP or a solicitation was just put out 30 days before the deadline. And those are very legitimate. That one specifically is a legitimate reason for them to maybe be a little bit late. If they didn't know the RFP was coming out, or if it comes out in a very short timeline to the deadline, they're going to have a late start and they're going to need to come to you a little last minute.
Some other reasons are time management issues, and I think this can be probably a primary factor in faculty's being late to submit proposals. They just don't budget enough time, and with all of their commitments, we certainly understand. Not only teaching but committee work, research, and then grant writing that's a lot. That's a big burden. That's a heavy burden, and we try to keep that in mind when we're writing policy. We get that they forgot they had to submit it internally. They didn't realize that it needed to go internally. They thought that they could submit it directly to the sponsor themselves. We get a lot of requests to add faculty to grants.gov, and we don't allow our faculty to use grants.gov. We submit the proposals through grants.gov for them. But that's typically when we find out that they're trying to submit a proposal, is when they're asking to add to a system that we already have established. We get a lot of, they didn't know they needed to go through a process because the proposal is to a foundation, so they didn't think it mattered, or that it was under a certain amount of money. My proposal is only for $5,000, so I didn't think it needed approval. It was just a pre-proposal, but with a budget and a justification and a scope of work that's committing the institution to something. So, one of the questions we wanted to ask in the chat is, what is the most creative reason you've heard for a late submission? Because we've heard a lot of creative ones. I mean, I've actually had a proposal submission and award that was written on a cocktail napkin, where a PI was sitting in a bar with the director of a nonprofit, and they made an agreement on a cocktail napkin. And I had that framed in my office for a long time. So, yeah, I
we're
think
seeing in the chat, we've got one where, you know, it was a sub award to another institution rather than a direct to an agency, so they didn't think they had to route that. And then, you know, some that maybe the rules just don't apply to them, which, you know, I think you will see sometimes. And, you know, some other that, you know, a lot of late submitters are kind of the frequent flyers, which I think is pretty common as well, that you're going to see the same people kind of late over and over again.
I like the too busy saving lives.
That's a good.
Yes, graduate students will submit them on their own as well. The soft deadline, that's a good one. I didn't know it was a hard deadline. The various, the rules don't apply to me.
Yeah, and they just have no excuses. It's just get it done, which you see a lot too. They're just gonna, you know, they're coming to you and they expect you to just get it done. And that's kind of the nature of a pre-award job.
The PIs who used to be POs for agencies, we haven't had that at our institution, but I could see where that would be a what deadline.
Yeah.
The dog ate my narrative. Yeah, so we get it. We all see a number of excuses as to why those proposals are submitted late. So what can we do about it? What can we do to help faculty submit proposals on time and to help ourselves from going insane with all the late submissions? You know, we work with faculty who start their proposal in our system 4 months in advance, and they send everything as they're working through it to their grant coordinator, and they have a schedule, which our grant coordinators provide of due dates, and they follow it, and they get the proposal submitted on time. And those are great. But then we also have the faculty members who come in while we're working with all of these people who are all due at the same time, and then they come in day 2 and say, you've got to get this submitted for me. It's not fair to everyone. So some of the alternatives, and Lindsey, if you want to go ahead and start with this one.
Yeah, so first, before we kind of talk about the alternatives, I want to talk a little bit about why these internal approvals are so important and what kind of dangers you get into if you don't have any internal review for proposals. And most of it is, you know, going to be related to your budget. Specifically, a PI may be committing cost share that the university or the department cannot meet, committing an F&A waiver or a lowered F&A rate that the university does not want to meet or cannot meet. And also committing effort that faculty member cannot meet themselves. Maybe they're overcommitted, or their teaching schedule is too high, their department chair cannot spare them the effort that they're trying to put on this grant. And so all of these are really high risk factors for internal reviews, and they become even more high risk if those proposals are awarded to stay in compliance with the federal guidelines and even foundation guidelines and other types of sponsors guidelines, because every sponsor you see is going to have their own set of rules and regulations that we have to stick to. So yeah, all of these instances just really put the university at a high compliance risk and an audit risk if these types of commitments can't be met. So that's why we ask PIs to get these internals approvals and get them routed so that we can review them. So sometimes reviews are done in a department or at a college level before they go to a central office. That's how it's handled in my college. We have 4 pre-award team members who work with PIs directly and route proposals with the budget justification abstract for internal reviews. And when the reviews are done in the college, instead of going straight to a central office like Bruxanne's university it can extend the number of days that are needed for the review and submission, because first the college and department has to look at that and work with that PI and get those types of internal approvals. And then if that college or department cannot submit themselves, which is the situation that we're in at Georgia State, the central office has to submit the final proposal. So the central office kind of has their own timeline, and then we have to even extend that timeline out so that we have time to get the college and department approvals before it goes to the central office for their review and final approval and submission. And then, you know, if they're late, the problem you run into is that a lot of these proposals don't get very thoroughly reviewed because we're just trying to get them pushed through. You know, if you see a PI 2 days before the deadline or even a day of, you know, we have all seen crazy timelines like that. You're just trying to get the stuff done and get it pushed through, especially if you can't submit yourself, if it's got to get to a central office to submit. So that's why, you know, it makes an even tighter timeline, because there's basically 2 different review processes in different offices.
So one of the things that we're playing around with is having the certain documents for proposal due at different times. We used to require the complete proposal to come in 5 days before the external deadline. Now we're experimenting, I guess, with having the budget, scope of work and budget justification to come in early as possible. Actually, we're encouraging faculty to submit those documents first. So if it's a month before, 2 months before, 2 weeks before, whatever, we're trying to get that pushed through first so that those internal approvals on the budget are complete on the budget and scope, and then they can concentrate on the technical documents. So far we've only been doing it for a few months, so we haven't seen a big move in that timeline shift that we're hoping for. But as I think faculty start using this process more frequently as we progress throughout the year, I think we'll see that will have an effect on when we get those approvals completed. So, you know, because we're not as concerned about the technical documentation like bio sketches and support pages, we're more concerned with subawards. You know, what I think somebody said it earlier in the chat, having somebody submit a proposal at 5 days with 14 subawards is a difficult challenge. And then, you know, address the potential changes in that budget if it's approved early. We've developed an internal process where if it's a certain percentage or a certain amount, it won't have to go through the approval process again. We can do it by email or have the VPR approve it. So one of the things that our office has tried to do, we started talking about this with our research council in, I want to say it was the spring of 2019, about changing our policy. We put together a committee, and our research council is comprised primarily of research associate deans for each of the colleges, as well as the library and the graduate school. So we put together a committee and we did some research, and we came up with a draft proposed change for our proposal submission policy, which instead of relying on a strict 5-day rule, relies on a risk assessment matrix for faculty. That has been shared out in the documents if you'd like to take a look at it, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the items in that. And again, this is a draft. We had planned to submit this for approval last spring, but some stuff happened. So we are hoping to get this into the hopper for the summer for review and approval by our faculty senate and the cabinet, and then into practice with some revisions. So one of the things that we do with this, it's pretty much your standard policy for proposal submission, but we define the differences between a full review, a limited review, and no review. And then we provide the deadlines for those for standard proposals and then complex proposals. And this was new for us because we did not before to make a distinction between the two. Pretty much everything was due at 5 days, but we found that when we have proposals with a lot of subawards or international components, that we do need a longer timeline. So what we have proposed is that if you'd like a full review for a standard proposal, that it come in at 5 days prior to the sponsor deadline. If you have a complex proposal, we're asking for 15 days. Now, complexity is dependent upon, of course, a number of factors. The mechanism, is it a contract or is it a proposal? The amount, the costs, sponsor type, number of PIs and co-PIs, number of collaborators at other institutions, any compliance issues, foreign influence, intellectual property, export control. Is it a DOD? Can we accept the FAR clauses? Is there international involvement? And of course, then that number of subawards. So when the grant coordinators will help determine the proposal complexity level, that's something we're working on as well. And then the faculty can look at the matrix and see if they want a limited review, then they can get it 3 to 4 days before. If it's a complex one, they can bring it in 10 to 14 days before. And we've provided them with the risk factors for rejection or withdrawal. So we assign each category, full review, limited review, no review. Of course, full review are going to have a low risk factor. The limited reviews are medium and the no reviews are high. And I'd like to talk to whomever has implemented this recently. I think Cynthia Kane it said in the chat, because I think this will work for our institution. We rarely have returned without review proposals, which is great. So, we're doing something right in that area, but right now the number of proposal submissions that we're getting is increasing and the number of staff that we have is not. So we have to do something to make that change. Lindsey, did you have any more comments on that?
No, the handout that I provided for the presentation is just an internal college document that we use at Georgia State that we give out to our faculties that explain the timeline to them, explain what they can expect from their grants officer when they come early, and how we can help them. And we try to communicate this as best we can. And I mean, step one is 2 to 4 months before submission. So we're trying to put it in their head to, come as early as even if you might back out later and not submit it, that's okay. But at least we can go ahead and get you on the list and get somebody assigned to you and let that grants officer try to kind of follow up, if they do, go silent for a while, then at least we kind of have them on the list and can keep pinging them to try to get us their stuff. So this handout is just something that we've given out to our faculties to try to be as transparent as possible with what kind of services we can provide and how we can be more helpful the more time they give us, and how the close to know exactly what kind of services they're gonna get from us, and they like to kind of have an idea of what kind of timeline we're expecting. That doesn't mean they always adhere to it, but they at least do, in most cases, seem open to it.
Great.
And then I think you go ahead, Bruxanne.
Yeah, I was just going to move to, and there's a lot of conversation in the chat, and I really appreciate it. I wish I could get to it all, but we'll do it in just a few minutes when we finish our presentation, which I think we only have 2 more slides. So how do we make the process less painful? And by less painful, we mean less painful for everyone. We understand the faculty are under pressure. They have little time to spare with their teaching loads, their committee assignments, their research. So how can we make it work better? Lindsey, you want to start?
Yeah, and this first one, encouraging faculty to submit their budgets and justifications and subaward information as early as possible, just goes back to kind of what Bruxanne was talking on the last slide, in that, if we can get kind of those basic documents, and especially if they have subs or international components, things that we know are going to take a lot of time, if we can get them to give us those first, let's get those hammered out, at least get the documents that are needed to get it routed, then they can continue to work on their research strategy, their specific aims, things like that, aren't going to be read necessarily word for word in a review process. And you can even kind of stagger it. You can say, let's do your budget, your subs, your justification first, try to get that routed, then let's think about, administrative documents like bio sketches and current and pending support that are pretty standard. Let's try to get those in. And then, that can maybe elongate the time that they have to work on their very specific technical documents to upload. I did see some comments in the chat about, the kind of sometimes the issue with routing a budget early is that you're going to get a lot of changes. And sometimes that is true. You get it routed and then they come back and they say, no, I want to change my effort, or I want to add a GRA, things like that. And, what's the best way to track that? In the department, college level for us, we try to just stay in constant contact with that PI during the process. So if they're constantly making changes, we try to tell them at the beginning, let's get this budget as finalized as possible, because that's what's going to be approved. And if you change your effort, or especially if you're changing cost share or something like that, you're going to push yourself back through the entire approval process again. So let's try to get it as finalized as possible before we work through those approvals. But that's not always going to happen. And sometimes you're just going to, you are going to have those last minute changes. And sometimes I think depending on the system that a university is using, you might have to send it back through approvals, and, you might not, or you might just have internal kind of guidelines about what has to be reapproved and what doesn't.
Some of the other processes that we're using or have used or experimenting with, the use of intent forms, so notice of intent to submit a proposal, using questionnaires or surveys to capture proposal details and those potential challenges early on, not just with the IRB or IACOOK, but export control, international activities, subawards, student employment, new positions, new courses. And then one that's come up more and more frequently that we're going to have a presentation about just after this is foreign influence. So all of these things have to be mitigated in advance of the proposal submission. Some other activities, of course, encouraging faculty to submit budgets and justifications as early as possible, like we've talked about. Creating process improvements, such as using templated language for correspondence with faculty on certain sections. We've recently implemented templated language that the grant coordinators use. So when a certain, when they use, we have a survey that they complete in order to start a proposal. And if they indicate a positive answer on one of the questions, that triggers the grant coordinator to pull that templated language and send that out to the faculty to get more information. So, using those types of mechanisms to make it less painful for everyone, to reduce the back and forth communication, to eliminate the need for grant coordinators to re-explain everything. They just pull a piece of information and drop it in. Is, I think, helpful. And then I believe, one of the things that we need in our area too is communication and education to faculty. I'll let Lindsey talk about communicating policy.
Yeah, a lot of times the communication to faculty can be a big key to getting them to adhere to your timelines. One thing that we've done is that we, a couple of years ago, started once a semester trying to attend one faculty meeting a semester for each department to really get in front of them. We gave out this pre-award handout. We also had a post-award handout. And we just talked about the entire process of cradle to grave. And in those meetings, we really tried to hammer home the importance of adhering to these timelines, why the review is so important, like we talked about, and that, you know, we're not just putting these type of restrictions on them because it's fun for us, but because there are, you know, very serious risks and consequences if proposals don't get reviewed, not only to the university, but to the faculty member themselves. Like Bruxanne said, you know, you might get one that gets returned without review if it hasn't been reviewed internally first too. We can't catch mistakes, and so the sponsor is going to return it as well. So we have found that to be helpful, kind of getting out in front of them and having face-to-face communication with them. We've also found that communicating to faculty the number of proposals that are going in on like really certain big, like NIH R01, R21, some of those big NSF deadlines. You know, if we're telling those faculty, hey, you know, we've got 30 proposals that are due this day, so it's going to be very beneficial to you to let's get it done early, because you don't want to get stuck in as a clog in that wheel, and maybe you don't see a review or you don't get a very thorough review, and that's putting your application at risk. We've also had our Associate Dean of Research in the college, you know, when those big types of deadlines are coming out, to send out an email a month before saying, hey, if you know you're gonna work on one of these proposals, please go ahead and reach out to the research administration team, and put even in his email the importance of adhering to the deadlines and reviews. And we've found some of that to be helpful. I mean, we still obviously have last minute come in all the time, but I think a lot of the faculty have a better grasp now of why review is important and why we're asking them to adhere to timelines.
Yeah, we have, you know, one of the things that we do when we get those big, so we're a central office. We have 4 grant coordinators that are signed out by colleges. So if one, I want to say, if you're in Georgia, you know, G.R.A.N.T, those pre-applications that are due once a year in September. And last year, I believe we received 32 pre-applications. So that's one grant coordinator submitting 32 pre-applications for just one program in the same week. So we went to the research associate dean and the chair of those departments, and we came up with a process to make that less painful for everyone. And also to share the workload out with some of the other grant coordinators when they're looking at those budgets. We also provide a budget template for faculty to work with. We use Koali research for our ERA system. So we don't have faculty go into the system and enter their own budgets. Everything runs through the grant coordinators. And we've given them a budget template to work with. If they want to use it, they can, and then they can send that to the grant coordinator. So that helps eliminate some of that back and forth. You know, here's the budget I want. Well, here's the budget you can get. Well, what if I want this? And so it gives a little bit more opportunity to work on the actual substance than to go back and forth on little things. So that was the end of our presentation, but we did have some questions. In general, and I don't know, Erica, can we open it up and do the chat, or everyone speak, or how do you want to do this?
So we can do it just like we did the last one. If they want to raise their hand, we'll allow them to unmute themselves and then answer your questions or ask. Okay.
Well, I'll just ask these questions in general, and then we'll do the hand raising if that's okay.
Sure.
So are there any institutions who just say no to late proposal submissions, and how does that go over with faculty? What are some alternatives to or improvements you found to make the process work better at your institution? How do you communicate and or message the policy and potential consequences to faculty? And most importantly, do you have any tips or tricks to share? Because we are always ready for some.
And I'm seeing in the chat some of the same type of stuff, like asking for the easier documents up front and getting them reviewed early. I think that's something that may be pretty common that we talked about.
Okay, so we have Cynthia Kane has her hand raised. I'm gonna ask her to unmute and let us know what institution she's from.
Hi, I can show my face too. Sorry, the sun is coming in my window, so I may disappear. But so we implemented in September last year the new deadline policy, which is the risk matrix, Bruxanne, we were talking about, or you were talking about, and I was chatting about. Prior to that, we had a quote 5-day policy that wasn't enforced. And when I came on board and my team didn't feel as though they were supported in that proposal process or deadline process, we decided to go with the matrix. We define the risk, the 5-day, we actually have 5-day, 3-day, day of, and we gave our staff the authority and full support to say no on that last day. They have not yet. Some of them are very gun shy because they've been in their job for many years. They've built relationships with their faculty. So they were really, really cautious about having that authority, even though we've told them they have our full support. However, the best thing that we did when we implemented this was prior to implementation, we did a total roadshow. We went to the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, had her review the new policy and provide feedback. We went to the associate deans and deans, so the associate deans for research and the deans for each of our colleges, and let them review the policy and ask any questions. We went to the research environment subcommittee of the Faculty Senate, had them review the policy and provide any feedback. And we went to the graduate research committee, which is graduate studies and research committee that is formed with members of from all across campus. And they also had the opportunity for conferral. Now I said conferral. We didn't say we're going to let you change what we submitted for or suggested to implement, but we're asking for your feedback. And we got good feedback, and we're able to then go forward with our implementation, roll it out to faculty with communication and going to different department meetings for any question and answer. And it actually went over really well. We still have the same challenges that we had before. However, my team feels more supported, and we really do adhere to the 3-day risk assessment. 5 days, you give us everything, we're going to give you our best review. Anything between 5 and 3 days, we're going to give it a review, but it may not be thorough. We're going to look at these key items. And then that last day, there is no review. If we have time, we might do our best. However, we are going, if we feel it's at least submission worthy from all the documents are there, we may submit, or we have the authority to say no and not submit. And I was the one who posted in the chat that said, we actually had one returned without review because the final documents came in the day of. My contract and grant specialist felt she should go ahead and submit because she didn't want to say no, came back, returned without review. And the PI said, oh yeah, I acknowledge that I submitted it and it was highly at risk, and oh well, which feels a little bit bad to me because there's a lot of people's time wasted. And yet that's how he went forward with that. I don't know if that's any helps at all.
And Cynthia, how did you communicate that risk matrix to your faculty members or to your individual PIs so they would know what they were getting into when they submitted on those days?
So the initial communication was done with a basically email blast of the new policy as we implemented it. When they send, we do an intent to submit. So when we receive the intent to submit, we determine the risk at that point, and we communicate back to them where they are in the risk matrix. We have great PIs that start a month or two in advance and maybe just need to be reminded they're getting close. We have others that are highly successful researchers that have received the new policy, have been reminded many times, and still come in day before, day of. So we did do a pretty big communication outreach for that, and we continue to remind them with each intent that we get.
Gotcha.
Great.
Thanks. That's great info. Yeah, and a good way to get that message out.
I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. There are a couple of comments in the chat. But I think that's it for questions.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for allowing us to present to you today. And if you have any questions, the beginning of the presentation has our email. And I'd be happy to share anything with you. And for those of you that are asking for the templated information, it is actually on our website. It's our Research Administrator's Standard Operating Procedures Manual. And that's where all the templates are located. So if you're looking for them, please feel free to go out to our website and you can borrow anything you want if you have our permission.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great. So you guys, thank you for that. Was another wonderful presentation. Again, if you got on a little late, we did share those presentation and handouts in the chat, but they will also be sent to all registered participants. With having said that, we are ready to go into another break. We have about 15 minutes. And we'll do our next presentation at 11:30. So go ahead and take a 15-minute break and we'll see you at 11:30, guys. Thanks.